Welcome to the Worth It Practice podcast. It's me again, Leah Kleonsky, and today I'm going to spend some time pulling back the curtain to Thriving Child Center and telling you about the Money Mondays system that I use to help me understand my finances on a weekly and monthly basis and track some things that are important to me so that I can make good financial decisions for the business. So the reason that I developed this system, it's very simple, comes from running into a really big problem one week. And here's the problem. I overdrew my account by $6,000 and had to scramble. So this is how this problem developed. When my business was small and there were very clear expenses and very clear revenue streams, managing the finances of the practice was easy. I would see clients, I would make money, my expenses were the same. My expenses were things like rent, Psychology Today profile, telephone system, EHR, right? It was like very, very simple. I would bring in the money, it would go out in a very specific way. And at the end of each month, I would pay myself a distribution. So I have an S Corp, and that means that you can take distributions after your paycheck if there's money left over, if there's profit left over. And that used to be really easy. I would just pay all the expenses, take my distribution, and then start making the money again. So it was this really easy system to have. As I started bringing on contractors, things got a little bit more complicated, but not that much more complicated. It was like, okay, we're bringing in the money. Now I am paying other people and myself. And then we are starting over again. So it was the same thing. Bring in the money, pay all the expenses, pay myself, leave a little bit there, start over the next month. But as the practice has grown, and especially as we hit this year, 2025, suddenly everything got way more complicated. So one thing that happened is the business was just bringing in much more money, right? So like there was a lot more revenue coming in. It was hard to track. Another more challenging thing that was happening is my expenses were changing and becoming a lot more variable. Suddenly, my office manager has an assistant that I had to hire from somewhere else. We're making changes to the website. We're doing different marketing campaigns. I'm hosting this event. Like all of the expenses were coming in. They were coming in at different times. They were coming in different amounts. Some of them were one-time expensive expenses. Some of them were regular expenses. I just felt like things were sort of getting out of control. I didn't really know how much money I was making a week anymore. I didn't know how much money I was going to spend a week anymore. I didn't even really know on a monthly basis. So I could go back and look at my profit and loss statement and like figure out what had happened the previous month, but I didn't know in real time. Like I did not know what the rhythms were for my business. I did not know what we were likely to bring in a week, and I didn't know what we were likely to spend by the end of the month. And I didn't know when those expenses would hit our revenue coming in. Knowing all of that made me very blind. So I kind of knew this was a problem, but I didn't realize how serious of a problem it was until a whole bunch of expenses came due at the same time. I paid everything, looked into my account after, and was like, oh no, I've overdrawn this account by $6,000. I didn't have the revenue coming in fast enough for these expenses. And if I had spaced them differently, this wouldn't have happened. So it ended up fine. I did like a mad scramble. I was able to bring in money from my personal account. So it covered everything in time. There were no long-term repercussions. To me, it showed this huge flaw in the way that I was managing the business finances, where I was like, this cannot happen again. I need to know more. I need to know when I usually have to pay for things. I need to know how much money we're bringing in on a weekly basis. I need to just have some way of just tracking the flow of what is going on that is simple and doable, that I can look at every week that makes sense in my brain. And so while I was pondering this and struggling with this, I happened to listen to a podcast episode. This often happens to me. It almost feels like serendipity where I'm like, I have this problem and I don't know what to do. And then an episode of Money Skills for Therapists came on and she was talking and she's like, do you feel like you don't know the revenue flow in your business? And I was like, yes, I do feel like that. So she introduced an idea of having a spreadsheet that you do on a weekly basis. And I took this idea and I created my own spreadsheet with the things that I really want to keep track of on a regular basis. So you can, of course, go back and listen to her episode, and we'll link it in the show notes where she talks through this system. But I'll tell you how I've made it work for me in a way that is very, very simple, that now makes me feel like I'm in control of my money. So I personally love to look at my finances on Mondays. So I actually, every single day, I do look at my finances because I want to see if anything weird is going on. So I pull up the business account every morning just to see what's in there, what came in from the previous day, what expenses came out. So I always look at it every single day. But on Mondays, I do a deep dive on the previous week. And so I'm going to look at my spreadsheet while I'm talking to you so I can tell you some of the main things I track. So every Monday, I write down how much money is in the account that morning when I look at it, just to compare, just so that I know what should I generally expect. And that way, if that number is a lot different than what I generally expect, I can ask myself why. I like to know why all things are happening in the business. I like to know why good things are happening and why bad things are happening. And nothing will drive me crazy more than something that I don't understand, right? If the number is low, but it's July, so I know why it's low, that's fine with me. If the number is low in November, I'm going to feel really anxious about that. So I, every week, just write down how much is in there on my spreadsheet. The other thing I look at is how much money came into the practice last week. So I look through my bank statement and I add up all the revenue that came into the practice because I want to know generally how much money are we bringing in every single week. And I want a comparison. I want to see week by week by week. Again, so if that number is vastly different than I expect, I can go back and try to figure out why. Is it that something happened with Stripe and they didn't pay us on time? By the way, that did happen last week with Simple Practice. For some reason, the Stripe payments didn't come through. And so there was a gap of missing money and I noticed it. So is there an issue with that? It helps me to know how much money is going to come into the practice in a week because then I can project out for expenses. If I'm going to have to pay this bill and I know this amount of money is probably going to come into the business, I can calculate what other things I can pay at the same time. So it gives me a lot more reassurance. I also always track when I pay people for things, just on that week by week basis so I can see the flow. So if I pay my contractors, I put that in. I want to see the flow. Okay, this is what I paid them. If I pay myself, I want to see the flow. Okay, this is what I paid myself, and then this is what happened to the account as a result of that. I also track paying rent. Even though that expense is the same, I like to see the flow of it throughout the worksheet. I really need to get back in there and start tracking my marketing budget to see how much I'm spending on marketing a week. That would be smart. I've stopped doing that. I should start doing that again just so that I can keep track and be able to estimate on a weekly basis in a snapshot how much am I spending on marketing. And whenever I pay my credit card, I actually have a column for that. And I put in how much I paid the credit card because you don't have to wait till the end of the month to pay the credit card. Often I'll pay it in the middle in increments and I just want to see how that affects the cash flow. And so since I have been doing that on a weekly basis, every week doing this deep dive looking back, it has really been helpful to me. I just feel like I have a lot more understanding of what's going on. I never even come close to overdrawing the account anymore. I know what I can pay myself in distribution when I decide to do that. The whole flow of the account makes more sense to me. And this is not a super complicated system, but it's something that works for me on a regular basis. Because if you don't understand what's going on in your account, in your money, then you don't know how to make informed business decisions. And I know for some reason, like us therapists, we get all freaked out about the money in our practices. But then how are we going to know what to do next if we don't know what's coming in and what's going out and where it is going? And I'm so visual. I just need to see the flow of it in this Excel document. So yeah, let me give you the link to the episode that I listened to. Then you get to see the way I adapted it. And then you get to decide if something like this would be useful for you. Again, if it's just you, maybe you don't need it, although maybe it would be nice to really have those numbers and start tracking. But as things get more complicated, right, as you start having different revenue streams, being able to have that knowledge is just so reassuring. I recommend taking a day and just really giving yourself, not too long, 30 minutes to look through and understand what's going on in your account. But I hope that's helpful for you. I hope you never overdraw your account and feel that panicky feeling. And I hope you have a wonderful week.